Hello, everyone. Please wave if you can hear me. Excellent. So I have everyone muted right now. We're going to give it a few more minutes while as we wait for our leaders to join in. But I have everyone started. If you can hear me, that's great. And then once we get started, just bear with us for a few minutes and we'll go from there. If MP Shannon Stubbs, MLA David Hanson, Mayor Jean Sobolewski, or Reeve Greg Sawchuk are online, please send me a quick message here. I don't see you, but send me a quick message and then we'll be able to see. Oh, here's Greg, here's Jean. Lee's, okay, beautiful. There we go, yeah, admit. Okay, we're just getting a few more people joined here. I see Jean has joined us. Just bear with us a few minutes. Jean, I've unmuted you. Can you hear me? Or hang on, I'm going to unmute you. Can you hear me?
How about myself? Yeah, I can hear you.
Okay, perfect. So we'll keep you in the loop here. I'm going to mute you for now, and then I'm just going to wait and see when everybody else joins. The thing that this is, I can see where people are muted, but somebody's not. Yeah. Okay, guys, just bear with us a minute. Can you maybe reach out and see where Shannon is? Greg is here. Greg, I see you're here, but I don't think we have video for you. So just have a look at that. Hi, Jenna.
See you later. Don't pick your nose on Zoom.
Somebody just said something about picking their nose. Who's not muted?
Jenna told me not to pick my nose. Everybody can see it.
Okay, and don't do that.
Hi, Bill. Hi, Mitch. Gino, Carrie Ann, Lisa. Hey, Mr. Melvin.
See, Bill, when we raise our hands, how easy it is to see in Zoom.
Oh.
Yeah, much easier in Zoom.
Okay, I think Shannon is joining us now here in just a moment. There's Shannon. Yeah, they're connecting audio. Can't hear you. I'm going to unmute her. Unmute. Shannon's.
Yes.
There we are. Okay, I see you. Okay, I've got you unmuted. So I'm going to mute everybody and then I'll do an introduction and then I'll unmute each speaker as we go, okay? I see we have Jean, we have Greg, we have Shannon. Just wondering, and I don't see Dave Hanson. Does anybody have Dave Hanson on here? Maybe he'll join in shortly, or perhaps he's in legislature. Who knows? Hopefully not.
Says Dave is on, but he is on mute.
Okay, let me look for him. I see Dave Hutton. Oh, David Moore. Not seeing him there. Mr. Hanson, if you can hear us. I'm not able to mute. There's no video and no option for a speaker for his right now. So we'll just kind of get that figured out here quickly. Wow, we have more people than we thought.
Good.
39 participants signed in so far, so that's excellent. We'll see if I can get in. I'll just watch this. Give me one moment.
In the red thing, there's gold.
Just right back. That's great. Okay, everyone, I want to thank you all so much for joining. As people come in, I'm going to continuously hit mute all 4 participants, and then we're going to unmute as each speaker has the opportunity to speak. So first of all, I want to thank you all so much for joining in on our meeting of regional leaders today. I think it's an important one. Here at the Bonnyville Chamber of Commerce, we have been working tirelessly to try and ensure that resources are up to date, that we're reaching out to our members, that people have the information that they need in a timely manner. So while our office is closed to the public, we are here working for you, and we're trying to identify those gaps to send those up to all levels of government to make sure that decisions are made and that money gets into the hands of the pockets of Canadians as quickly as possible. We do know that there were some changes made to the CERB, Canadian Emergency Response Benefit, today, announced by Prime Minister Trudeau, which I hope Shannon will have something to say about that. So what we're going to do, you know, one thing we're focusing on is, while you might not be able to work in your business, let's try and work on your business. And let's try and answer the questions that you guys have and make sure that we're all getting through this together while being apart. Of course, I know we hear that a lot. So a couple of members of our board are on here today. So thank you so much to Lisa and Robin for joining in, and whoever else might be here. We do have, so like I said with Zoom, we do need to get something figured out here for Dave. I can see that he's kind of in there, but we need to make sure we get him his video and voice working, because we can't see him there. Otherwise, with Zoom, again, please keep yourself muted. When questions come at the end, we're going to allow each person to speak, and then there'll be questions at the end. Please type those questions into the group chat, and we will take those questions personally, kind of come one, come all, and we will answer those at the end of the meeting. So during this, you should not have to unmute your line, because that will add a lot of confusion on everything as it kind of comes along. So first things first, again, I wanted to say thank you to everyone for coming and for being here. We do have a lot of people, over 40 participants right now, which I'm really happy to see. So thank you all for taking that time to come in today. Sorry, mute. There we go. First things first, we're going to introduce our MP, Shannon Stubbs. I want her to speak first. I know her schedule has been very busy. Shannon was elected as a member of Parliament for the Lakeland in October of 2015, and of course re-elected in 2019. So congratulations on that, Shannon. We're really proud to have you represent our region. Lakeland is where Shannon grew up and currently lives on a farm with her husband, Shane. She's the vice chair of Standing Committee of Natural Resources and was appointed as the official opposition shadow minister for natural resources by Andrew Scheer on August 30th of 2017, a post she was reappointed to in November. She previously served as a deputy critic for natural resources and as the vice chair of the Special Select Standing Committee for Pay Equity. So in 2017, Shannon received the Maclean's Parliamentarian of the Year as MP who best represents constituents. And I think that that's something we can certainly see, being her constituents and seeing her activity on social media and the way she interacts with every single one of us on a daily basis. So Shannon, thank you so much for your service. Thank you everything that you do. I'm going to go ahead right now and unmute your line. So go ahead. You have 10 minutes to address everyone and see how they react today. Just one second. I'm going to get you unmuted here. One moment and there we go.
Good.
You're good, Shannon.
Okay, thank you. Well, thanks for that introduction. I didn't expect that, so I appreciate that. And I just want to thank you actually for your leadership and to the Bonnyville Chamber and all of your members. You are out in front on all kinds of issues. I want to commend you actually and recognize your participation in the Senate hearings on C-69.
Thank you.
Yeah, I recommended the Bonnyville Chamber for their participation there. I worked very closely with our Senate team in the Conservative caucus to do that crucial thing, which I think was to get the committees to go out on the road to actually hear from communities and from the private sector and from individuals about the potential impact of that legislation. Now, just on that note briefly, you know that we haven't given the fight up on that. We you know that they rejected the majority of the Senate amendment package, which of course was supported by, now has the support actually of every single premier and territorial leader in the country and a vast cross section of private sector proponents. So I just want to salute you for your leadership and support of your community and support of small businesses and for taking a real active role on that piece of legislation in particular. I thought maybe I would just give a little bit of an update for everybody about what's unfolded since Parliament suspended in March, and then just a couple of things that have happened since. I'm really looking forward to this opportunity actually to hear primarily from you and from your members and from your board about gaps and problems and shortcomings that still exist. We know that they are. We are committed to continuing to do our job as the official opposition to provide scrutiny and feedback into the government's announcements while endeavoring to support getting emergency measures and funding and loan guarantees and a number of other tools to Canadians as quickly as possible. So we're being very disciplined and trying very hard to do that dual role, because we have a duty as the official opposition to provide scrutiny, to ask questions, to make sure your voices are heard, to identify gaps and shortcomings. But we also know that it is more important than ever that we collaborate, that we work together with all parties, and that we keep as top of mind our priority, which is to help Canadians get through these very unprecedented and uncertain times. So you'll know that we did suspend, House of Commons did suspend on March 13th. Usually we stay in session until the last week of June. And we are currently slated to return on April 20th. But that will likely be with a small group of members of Parliament. Those negotiations are ongoing right now between the parties on exactly what that will look like. You'll know, of course, that we reconvened for an emergency session to pass the government's first legislative response to the pandemic on March 24th. You might have seen that part of what happened in that debate was the government trying to exercise or to implement for themselves an unprecedented scope and scale of power, basically giving them the ability to make any decision that they want without scrutiny and without oversight until 2022. Or 2022. So we were glad to be able to walk them back on that, but also within 2 days passed the emergency legislation. So we also successfully in that negotiations got both the finance and the health committee back up and running. So they've been doing that with various degrees of success given technological challenges over the last couple of weeks. But we think it's extremely important for those committees to be up and running for us to be able to continue to do our job, providing oversight and feedback. You'll know probably that it was on March 25th in the Senate that the finance minister promised emergency sector-specific measures for the energy sector. And in that Senate hearing, he said that support would be coming within days or hours. I suspect that here people on this call know better than most people in the entire country that we are still waiting for those measures. And just to let you know what I've heard about that is that there is an internal agreement on funding for orphan wells. Still unsure about what that will look like, likely to provincial governments or the Orphan Well Association, but apparently still debate internally with the Liberals on exactly what they're going to do in terms of sector-specific support. So the most recent update that I can tell you that I've heard is they're still saying this will come by the end of this week, but it looks like they may just bring forward a package that has what they're calling measures to support industry in general. So they may be trying a one-size-fits-all here approach and may not have oil and gas specific measures. Or I've heard that they may do oil and gas sector specific measures, but bundle it in a bigger announcement with measures required, with measures for other sectors of the economy. So I hope that you were able to see that along with my colleague Pierre Poilievre. I issued an op-ed on April 2nd calling for, I think, a pretty common sense measure for the government to expedite reviews of major resource and energy projects that are currently in the late stages of their review with the regulator, and also to give immediate cabinet approval to a proposal for an LNG project that actually was recommended for approval in February, and the cabinet could do that tomorrow. That would amount to $21 billion worth of projects of private sector capital if the Liberals would ensure that the regulator has resources sufficient to be able to expedite the completion of those reviews while maintaining Canada's standards, which of course are the highest in the world for any energy producing jurisdiction. And then on April 3rd, I hope you were able to see, I have repeatedly been doing this, but issued a fairly substantive call to action as well as some suggestions for the Liberals as they keep promising energy specific measures. And I've highlighted the emergency needs for them to address involving liquidity measures for companies, specifically focused on small and medium-sized enterprises and the service and supply aspect of the sector, a number of measures for them to increase competitiveness and reduce costs and put their tools down on any potential regulatory and policy changes so that we can reduce uncertainty, and also with a focus on employment, sustaining jobs and bringing jobs back in the energy sector, and then also an emphasis on market access. Because I think what's safe to say is that as the world recovers and as the economy recovers, global oil and gas demand will resume, and it will continue to increase. So as you know, as Conservatives, we want Canada to be a lead producer and exporter of oil and gas and a destination of choice for energy investment. And what will, I think, be really key in recovery is that major energy infrastructure projects, as well as a whole variety of major resource projects, be up and ready to go to be able to put people back to work. So I've suggested the government actually act to take a two-pronged track, one on short-term measures to ensure through this emergency the survival of the sector, but also medium and long-term measures to ensure the long-term recovery and growth of the energy sector in Canada. You will know that on that second point, there is a stark ideological difference between the Conservatives and frankly, many Liberals and all of the other parties in the House of Commons. So I want to let everybody here know that we are currently developing a suite of proposals. My job obviously is focusing on oil and gas, but our shadow cabinet and our leader right across our caucus right now are in the process of developing proposals and plans for economic recovery. And so I just want to put that out there. If you'd like to send anything into our office, any of your members, including gaps in the current emergency measures, but also looking forward for long-term measures, I'll be more than happy to receive that and to feed that into our process of policy development. You have probably noticed we recently have been talking more about the need for a plan for restoration and relaunch of the economy. And I wouldn't mind if at the end I could get some feedback from you on that. You know, where we obviously as a caucus and as elected representatives are you know, concerned obviously without a doubt with the health measures that need to be required and with, you know, with doing everything necessary to protect the vulnerable and to flatten the curve. But we also think it's important that the government be planning ahead. And so if you could give me some feedback on that, whether or not you think it's time to talk about that as the opposition, I think it'd be fair to say that we would probably be the only party who would start leading that discussion. And we do plan to call on the Liberals to operate on those two tracks. But I'd like to know from you what you hear about that. You'll know that on April 8th, we proposed a series of additional measures for small businesses. And I can go through a little bit of those later if you would like, but including GST remittance for the last year, including some breaks on payroll taxes. We have suggested that the Canadian emergency business accounts be immediately set up, and so that they can flow through to small businesses for $40,000 in interest-free loans. We've asked for some adjustments on the demonstration of the 30% revenue loss, so using other metrics like loss of earnings, subscriptions, and orders. And we have recommended that they allow owner and operators to become wage earning employees instead of just dividend recipients, so they could also qualify for the wage subsidy if they so choose. We have been hearing concerns about the ability to access the wage subsidy that has been announced, either for companies that can't demonstrate revenue that would apply to seasonal operations. I think that's one of the changes that the Prime Minister made today. And it would be relevant to companies, say like junior miners, you know, who of course can't show revenue until after. So we know that that is an issue that needs to be dealt with. I've also identified an issue that I've raised publicly, will continue to push on this, which is the exclusion of companies who demonstrate revenue from outside of the country. So I'll just give you an example on this. There's you know, as you know, many oil and gas service supply companies or explorers and producers are now, in part because of policy, forced to operate in other countries. That's where they generate their revenue. But these are companies that are Canadian founded, Canadian headquartered, they have Canadian staff, they have Canadian contractors, consultants, suppliers. Their entire supply and value chain is provided by Canadians, and they pay Canadian taxes. And that's a gap that has been raised with me, that those companies would be excluded. So you'll see us asking for a little bit more details on for some changes on that to the government. You'll probably know that we did have to go back in for an unusual one-day emergency sitting last Saturday. And that was, of course, because the Prime Minister made comments that his wage subsidy legislation did certain things that it didn't. So we were called back on Saturday to pass that legislation again, which we did, which now allows finally the federal government to be able to move forward on their support for small businesses, on the emergency benefit, and on the wage subsidy program. But we will continue to provide scrutiny on those programs in committee in coming days. And we were also able to secure more standing committees being operational. So I'll just give you the list of that. We've got, and this was a concession Liberals made to Conservatives because we're saying it's still important for Parliament to be able to keep working and doing our job. So the Government Operations and Estimates Committee, Human Resources, Skills and Social Development, the Status of Persons with Disabilities, Industry, Science and Technology, and then House Procedures, like dealing with our inside baseball stuff. So we have also enabled the Auditor General to be able to continue to examine elements of the government's responses until and report by June 1st, 2021. So that in addition to originally getting those finance and health committees up and running will allow us to provide more scrutiny and feedback and be able to be your voices in Parliament. So maybe I'll stop there. I have no idea what time I'm at. If that sounds good to you, and then if we could maybe get into details later, or depending on what arises in the question section.
Absolutely, Shannon.
Okay.
You brought up a lot of good points. And so anybody that has any questions for Shannon now, please write them down or send them to us in our chat. And we will come back after we get some discussion from our other leaders on those questions. One thing I do want to say though, Shannon, I know you talked about the wage subsidy. So for any small businesses that are on the call right now, please note that you need to go in right now to set up your CRA for My Business. My Business account for CRA, because they're going to send you a code, and you're going to have to go in, register, get that code in the mail. So then if you wait until the wage subsidy is out and you're able to apply for it, that's going to cause further delays because you're going to have to wait for that. So it's important that you get set up for that My CRA for Business right away and get that in there, because that's one thing that you need, and set up your direct deposit and all that. So that will prevent further delays down the road. That's something that we notice and we're trying to tell our members. Also, for those of you, please follow Shannon's Facebook page. So she's always posting great videos and comments and anything that she's doing to advocate for our region on her Facebook. And that's where I keep up on what she's doing and what's happening locally. So everyone follow Shannon and know that that's all there. So I'm going to go ahead and mute your line, Shannon.
Thank you.
Thank you so much. Really appreciate that. Please stick with us. Next up, I am going to ask, we did get MLA David Hanson on our line. So Dave, I've gone ahead and unmuted you, and we're going to give you some time, 10 minutes now, to speak to your constituents and businesses in our area about what's happening on your level.
Super. Can you hear me okay?
I can hear you.
Awesome. Thank you. Well, first of all, I'd like to thank everybody for their patience throughout the last month or 6 weeks, I guess. And unfortunately, we're probably got a few more weeks ahead, but also like to, just thank all the frontline workers that are out there. Don't have much of a choice but to go to work and deal with these things. Just an update for our area. We do have 7 cases in the Bonnyville area and 6 in the Cold Lake area. We don't have any in St. Paul. And my understanding is that none of these cases are hospitalized. So it is not as bad as some other areas, but we still have to be very, very cognizant that it could spread. And I'm hoping that we don't end up with any issues in our seniors complexes. I've contacted all of those in the last couple of days to make sure that they've got the PPE that they need. And there was a couple of shortages, but I think we've addressed that. So hopefully if Mr. Prevost is on the line, he could comment on that. But I did contact the leadership in the local seniors complexes to make sure that they were okay. One thing is we need to support our local businesses wherever possible, those that are still open. I know that it's a real struggle. I get complaints from people all the time about why this company can open and that one can't. But it's just very, very important, as I said, that we stick to the stay home as much as possible. We're this week on a constituency break. We were supposed to go back into the House this week, and they decided that they would recognize the scheduled constituency break and keep us out. So I'm sitting here at home in Owl's Eye and trying to stay out of trouble just like everyone else. When it comes to the stimulus packages, I know that there's been a couple of announcements. Minister McIver announced a $2 billion package. One thing that I'm promoting, and I would like other leadership, Shannon, yourself included, is that any time that we talk about stimulus, is that it's very important that when these projects are assigned or given out, that we have to recognize and support local contractors and businesses as a priority. The last thing I want is a project happening up in Bonnyville and a company coming in from British Columbia doing the work. It isn't helpful, and we've had that issue on a couple of projects recently. So it's something that I push forward to my ministers and ministries all the time. The Bonnyville Cold Lake St. Paul, for some of you that don't know, actually provides and has provided for very many years 37% of the bitumen royalties for the province of Alberta. So it's very huge. We had a meeting last week with the Minister of Energy with 5 or 6 local businesses, and I think Greg, I had you on the line as well, just talking about some of the struggles that they're facing right now. And one of the things that when I got a chance to speak to the minister again is, and I probably tell her this once a week, is that this constituency is hugely important to revenue for the province, not only for our area, but the entire province and the country. So we need to be very cognizant of that, and that make sure that we're protecting our local oil companies to make sure that they can still operate even after this is over with. I know that we're in a real struggle with the oil prices. Western Canadian Select hovering around $5 a barrel is not helpful. So it's tough. We've got a kind of a double, triple whammy. We've been through 5 years of downturn in our area, and then we get hit with this OPEC oil fight and COVID-19 on top of it all. So, like I said, I started. I encourage everybody to reach out if you're having issues, or if you know somebody that's having issues with that's on the frontline work and can't get their PPE. Give me a shout. We did deal with that, like I said, just recently. So, other than that, one of the things that did come up that I'm trying to put forward, and I've mentioned it to a few of our ministers to see if we can make a change on that would affect everyone, is asking our utility companies at this time to cut back on some of their carrying charges, which is a huge part of everybody's bill. And I think it's a step if we could get that movement. I don't think there's a business or a private person in this province that would say that that's a bad idea at this point. And we need people to recognize that anywhere that we can help to, people are struggling right now, and we need to do whatever we can. So if that's something I can continue to push, I will do that and see if we can get some changes there. One of the other big things that's just come out is the provincial fire ban and ban on off-highway vehicles. And I know it doesn't make a whole lot of sense to people up here when we've got 3 feet of snow on the ground, but those rules are put out for the entire province, and I understand the rationale. The last thing we need right now is to have to deal with a forest fire and deal with COVID at the same time. I don't know how you would manage that. So I'm going to leave it at that. Open to any questions, and hopefully I can provide some answers for you.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dave. I really appreciate it. We do have some questions starting to come in. So what I'll do is I'm going to go ahead and again, leave those for the end. I've muted your line, Dave. If there's anything else you want to say, that's great. Thank you for the update on our area specifically. We really appreciate that. A couple questions I'm going to have for the leaders later are going to be surrounding mental health supports and that OPEC, the most recent OPEC announcement from Minister Savage. She just recently had a press release. So I'll have some questions about that for you guys a little later. So something to think about. Next up, we've got Reeve Greg Sawchuk, who we're going to allow to speak for a little while. I'm trying to unmute your line here, Greg. Let me just see. Can you go ahead and try and unmute your line? It's not letting me do it. There we go. Perfect. Okay, so guys, I failed on introducing Dave. Wonderful. I just wanted to let people know that Dave serves as the chair of Standing Committee on Resource Stewardship, and he was a previous member on different standing committees, Resource Stewardship, privileges, elections, standing orders, and printing, and Alberta's economic future. So we know that Dave's no stranger to our oil industry because he has worked in construction in both commercial and oil and gas sectors for 37 years. Thank you, Dave. Now we've got Reeve Greg Sawchuk, who has been farming for 20 years in our area, lived here since 1985, and has been an active member in our MD of Bonnyville community ever since. So thank you for everything you do, Greg, and go right ahead.
Thanks, Serena, and thanks for all the businesses being online there and watching. This is my third virtual meeting today, and we're getting very used to these things now. And surprisingly, software is progressing very quickly to make them better. So I'm going to touch on three things, basically where we were prior to COVID, the current situation, and where we hope to be in the future. And, you know, previous in the last, as Dave mentioned, we've been in a downturn up here for essentially 5 years. And we had seen the slowdown definitely at the MD, within the MD. Development permits for the last year were below the 2000 levels. And then if we pull out any MD spending, it was way down. So we'd also seen the pullback in industry, and some of that was because of regulation. And we saw delays to Imperial and their big plant expansion up there. Eventually they put that on the sidelines, and they're just doing some infill wells now. We saw CNRL pull back in their drilling. Normally they would have to drill 600 wells a year just to keep up with production, and their drilling is cut back to next to nothing. Of course, we saw Devon. We had a meeting with Devon about 6 months prior to their departure, and they had told us at that point in time that you know, it was a big company with some folks down in Oklahoma that could get approvals down there and in Texas in about 9 days, and up here it was taking us months to a year to get an approval for some work, right? So where were they going to go? They're going to go where they can get work done. And so eventually we saw them sell out. And we've seen some companies do okay. Those that have the ability to make downstream profits. So that would include your Suncor, your Imperial, and as well as Co-op with their refinery in Regina. So the other thing we saw, you know, prior to that was that we were losing people. We were getting definitely a population decrease in the MD, somewhere in that 1,200, 1,300 people had left since about 14. And of course, we've seen it in the number of homes and acreages that are for sale. So currently, once COVID hit, it was kind of strange. You know, it came on rather quickly from the province and feds. And it just so happened that our CAO was leaving on a snowmobile vacation. And so I was in contact with him a couple times on the phone. And then he said, you know what, Greg, the MD doesn't have a business continuity plan in place. So, you know, if there's any point to get out there to businesses today, is that just how important this was to have. On a small business, it's very difficult. On the bigger businesses where we have, you know, 170 employees, it was important to have. And so he came back right away and worked with the general managers to get that in place to ensure that your key people have the ability to either work away from the office or be replaced by somebody who can do their job in the office. And so things escalated very quickly. Eventually, we closed the office doors. There was a lot of talk with lawyers in those first few days as well, as we looked at liability in regards to, you know, looking after the health of our own employees. And so we felt it was in the best interest at that point in time to close the doors to the office, but to remain open for service. And so we had to kind of get a little inventive on that. And so we have some people working from home. We have some people working week on, week off. And but then when things happen, for example, if you get 6 inches of snow, well, you know what, it's all hands on deck, and everybody was called in, and they went to work. Other things like inside the office, you'll see that lunchrooms are closed. You know, you go in, you get your coffee, you get out. There's no loitering. You don't see the conversations in the hallways unless they are at a long distance. A lot of that is going on, and people are still getting the job done. We also saw a need for increased cleaning within the building, and I think a lot of businesses had to go that way as well. Where are we going right now? I don't think we did foresee it, but we knew we wanted to do something in regards to the economy. And so the MD actually dug into our reserves here in this budget season and pulled $20 million from reserves, which is going directly into local construction projects. So we're doing a total of about $50 million in construction projects, and we are on our CEO every week here. And he knows that we want to get these jobs done. We know that we have to try and stimulate a little bit of employment out there and get some money flowing. And in a lot of those cases, yeah, we can use local contractors for that. What are we looking at for some issues going forward? There is some concern over MD revenue, possible assessment changes coming from the province, but then just our general assessment decline as we see people's residences decline and the lack of development taking place within industry. We don't see that replacement. And as far as industry assessment, it drops off very quickly. And so that means it's a direct impact on revenue. And so we're watching that very closely. And so we'll probably have a little bit of a change to our budget next year. In regards to the future, you know what, as Shannon had said, the oil industry is not going away. The world still needs it. And you know what, we produce the best product in the world under the best circumstances, right? So we're going to continue to push that. I have definitely reached out to industry to help share in their good news stories, and I think Shannon's doing a fantastic job of putting some of those across the country. So I have received correspondence from all of the big industry players in regards to how they're dealing with COVID, and they are all very similar in the things that they have set up. They're doing the best they can, and it's a tough go out there. They do have some folks working from home, but we know in some of those plants, you know, you require a minimum amount of people to keep those things running. And but I think they're doing a great job out there. Going forward, there's some glimmer of hope. You know, we've got Trans Mountain that is progressing, Keystone that's progressing. These things are still a little bit away. We know that within the MD itself, we had on the books other projects, the Imperial plant, definitely CNRL have said, you know, we've barely tapped into some of the oil resource here, so there's plenty of opportunity there. There is a second Enbridge pipeline that was scheduled to go through the area, and it was very close to being a go in 14, and that got shut down. So it's still on the books too. As those other two major pipelines get built, we're going to need that one to get oil out of here as well. And so that, you know, I am, you know, cautiously optimistic, but it's going to take a little bit before we get over this hump. And you know, I just got to thank for sure all of the workers who are out there looking after everybody, and apologize to anybody who might have been swabbed by my wife, because she's been working in the swabbing clinics, and so if there's any bruised brains out there, yeah, just it's from her. So with that, I'll leave it there, and I'm open for questions later.
Thank you so much, Greg. I really appreciate that. All this information is great. We do have a few questions coming, so keep typing in your questions, and then we'll come back and ask them in a bit. I really appreciate all your feedback. Next up, of course, we've got Town of Bonnyville Mayor Gene Sobolewski, who has been elected since 2013 and re-elected in 2017. He was first elected as a councillor in 2004, so he's represented the Town of Bonnyville for many years, and we really appreciate everything that you have done here. Of course, you have 30 30 years of municipal experience in municipal engineering, public works administration, project management, and financial assessment and fleet management. So thank you, Jean, for everything you do for our community, and I'll give you a chance to address how things are happening and looking right now on a municipal level. So I'll go ahead and unmute your line, or try to. It's not letting me, so I'll get you to give it a shot.
About that. Okay, thank you very much, and again, Shannon and Dave, thank you for being able to attend this meeting. I'll be a little bit shorter, but I'll probably be a little more blunt. Right now, the town of Bonnyville, we had our financial statement approved last night. We're in a little bit of some dire straits as a result of some external factors, and one of them being some critical funding that was put forward, and our water line project was approved with that, and now that funding is no longer available. So we're in a bit of a nightmare, I guess, because this is the I guess one of the worst case solutions and problems that we've ever had. So number one, we're in a cash crunch as a result of external factors, to the tune of about $6 million for that water line. That has resulted in our borrowing capacity being put up to a limit. And then we've got the COVID, and of course the results of that, the deferral of taxes for those that want it, and the same thing with utilities, because everybody's hurting. And as you heard the Premier talking, the ATB will be extending a line of credit. Well, we don't have very much funding that we can put forward for lines of credit. So essentially, as pretty much everybody has noted, and even Michael with his question, there's a number of businesses that aren't even sure whether they could actually gear up, even with the issue of the funding from the federal government and some from the provincial government. It's going to be a very scary proposition to be able to get things going, and I think from the town's perspective, there's going to be the need for a major lifeline on two fronts, locally and regionally, and that's going to be an insurgent likely of infrastructure funding from the province. And Shannon, we're going to need your help to convince and same thing with Dave, to convince the province and the federal government to suspend that new West trade agreement. Because as Dave had illustrated earlier, we have an issue here in Bonnyville where we had two competent local contractors to bid on a substantial project, weren't even allowed to. It was basically a pre-qualification, and the new West trade agreement, especially from funding that comes from the federal government, it's going to be even harder to be able to emphasize local labor, local supply, and local equipment. Prior to the COVID announcement here 4 weeks ago, we had approximately 800 individuals laid off from the oil field as a result of the little fight that was going on between Russia and Saudi Arabia. That's 800 jobs. So essentially what we're going to need to do to avoid the mess that happened in the 1930s with the Great Depression is we're going to need to start focusing on what are we going to do to put people to work, because that's the essence of an economy. And every business owner in the community knows that people have to spend money. In order to spend money, you have to earn funds, and the funding that's coming from the provincial and particularly the federal government, that stimulus money is going to be great. That's going to get people over the hook, but you've got to be able to spend. We need major insurgencies. You've got countries like Argentina, Italy, and the others going to the IMF saying we need some significant bailout money, and we're going to be faced with that same situation not only nationally in Canada, but locally with the provincial government. I don't think there's going to be enough money to go around, so we have to learn and figure out how to spend it very, very wisely. And that's where myself and Dave have been talking quite a bit to talk about infrastructure projects to build the highways or repave highways. Let's build some water lines. Let's rebuild bridges. Let's put people back to work, because that's going to stimulate an economy. because as we're hearing, this is not a short-term pandemic. We're going to have a second go around here hitting there. Everybody's anticipating about the end of August, September through till about December. So we have to put programming into place that's going to cover that, because we've likely got some business in Bonnyville that are not going to be able to sustain themselves. And Shannon, I think one message that you need to send to the federal government, particularly with the wage subsidy. I talked to a number of businesses, so you've got 75% subsidies, and the business still has to prepare and put up 25% of that. But if they're not earning revenue, if nobody's buying product because the health officers are saying stay home, we have got to figure out how to change that particular philosophy. Businesses, some of them can't even afford the 25% to have an employee staying in a business playing crib or playing online games because there's no customers. So we really have to think about how we're going to have the economy, move the economy, and start moving goods and services. And one of the only things I can think of is with infrastructure stimulus and get the pipelines built and move forward, because the town of Bonnyville is front and center in this, and we're boots on the ground, and we're going to be supporting just about any initiative that comes along. So I'm going to end it at that, and free to answer questions and hopefully continue the dialogue here.
Thank you so much, Jean. Really appreciate it. As we go through all this, we know that it's been a lot. It's like you said, it's dire straits for everyone. So because it's been kind of dark, I'm going to start off with Gruff's question, where he says, what words of hope can you give businesses and residents of the Lakeland? And I'm going to put that to Dave, if you don't mind. Dave, I'm going to unmute you there. Go ahead.
Sure. So like you say, you know, we're all in this together. I think it's been very clear. We're very fortunate to be here in Alberta. When I look at the stats worldwide, I actually just brought up the most recent number of cases down in the States. They've got 26,299 new cases today, 2,259 deaths today alone in the US. It's just staggering. And so as bad as it is, I think that here in Canada, and especially here in Alberta, we've done a pretty good job of getting in front of this thing. Folks are just going to have to be patient, try and survive. And like I said, and I understand, Jean, when you talk about the rules and regulations that we have to follow when it comes to local contractors, but we still have to do whatever we can provincially. We have to make sure that our contractors, our oil companies and our contractors and our suppliers and everybody that adds on to that is alive and well for when we get into recovery, which hopefully, you know, looking at our curve here in the province and nationally, you know, we may be able to see some lifting of some restrictions in a couple of weeks, but that's not guaranteed, and it's a tough position to be in. All I can offer for hope is that I can guarantee you that your provincial government, myself included, is 100% behind our local businesses and trying to do our best to make sure that everybody gets by.
Thank you, Dave. I really appreciate it. Okay, next up, Michael Menzies with the Lakeland Connect has said, for the politicians, what do you make of the findings of our poll of over 115 businesses across the Lakeland that said 50% of businesses that have closed already wouldn't be able to open again in 3 months, and that over 60% of businesses are not confident supports like the wage subsidy can keep them operating? So whoever would like to answer that, give me a wave, and I'll, oh, there we go. I'll go to Shannon first, and then we'll go to Jean. Here you go, Shannon, go ahead.
Hey, thank you. Yeah, I mean, Michael, I would say that that's exactly why we are committed to working collaboratively, first of all, with the government and with all parties to ensure that their measures actually flow and that their actions actually meet, you know, match their words. I can tell you what a challenging role for us in the opposition is. We know that all Canadians are looking for us to work together, to collaborate, to get to the best solutions, and to not be partisan. But you may have seen Conservatives have been critical of the length of time that the measures have taken to be rolled out, and we've been cautioning about that since their emergency session when they messed up their legislation in the first time. And so I'm thankful to see those local numbers. It will help me in my advocacy, both within our caucus and as our committee work resumes, not because of what is happening, but because it reinforces exactly why we have been pushing the Liberals to act quickly in terms of these measures. You probably saw my colleague Pierre Poilievre 2 weeks ago or 3 weeks ago now, I think already, holding an availability, contrasting, for example, the emergency support measures in the United States. They've already flown them out. They've already got their measures, implemented, and their businesses are already able to access those supports. So I, for one, am deeply concerned about a whole array of measures that the government is enacting, and that they're too little too late. And I can say that it is extremely frustrating, but it is an issue that Conservatives have been raising repeatedly and will continue to do so, while also providing scrutiny and identifying gaps, and also making our own proposals.
Thank you so much, Shannon. Okay, Jean, I've unmuted you, or I'm trying to, but it's not working. Oh, there we go. Go ahead.
Okay, and Michael, great question, because I think the solution to it, there's nothing that's cookie cutter about it. It's a very scary reality. Kind of highlights what I was talking about before. With regard to Alberta, I completely support the Premier in his quest to try and solidify the North American market. Basically, when you have that predatory dumping and you have the world oil prices and the way they are, it's not going to do Alberta or the national economy any good. And I support the Premier in his quest for that. But right now, locally, and regionally, and even in Alberta, it's going to be jobs. It's all about jobs, because that is the only way that you're going to get the economy stimulated. That's the way this economy functions. And I mean, it's sad to say, but the measures that were put in place already by the federal government, I don't think they're well thought out in terms of particularly when they're dealing with the business. And we have a number of businessmen already, on the online here that can actually attest to the measures they're putting out really aren't going to do them any good, because it's say, for example, the loans, the business loan of $40,000. What is that going to do? That's a loan. If you can't pay it in 2 years to 3 years, it's a short-term gap. What we need to do is we need to take a page out of history, in my belief. Take a look at some of the programming that was done back in the 1930s to try and get us out of the Depression era. And look at the programming and look at how some of the stimulus happened. Look at what happened in the global marketplace. And I think we need to start taking a page out of history and figuring out how to best support business. Like, again, our economy is business-based. It is wage-based. It is supply and demand. It is all of those things underlined with a big exclamation mark. And when we start to interrupt those streams in terms of the way we have it here, recovery has to be understood. It has to be complete. And programming from governments, particularly the federal government, if they roll out another ICIP, we can't be hamstrung with rules as to, well, this is the way the program has worked in the last 15 years. That's not going to work that way. And the same thing at the provincial government. If we're going to start rolling out infrastructure projects and things like that, we're going to learn how to fast track it and hand money out perhaps to municipalities to be able to manage it and move things forward, because we're best positioned right now to be able to do that. It's all about jobs. It's about jobs. It's about jobs. And to help businesses that sell flowers, or the businesses that sell clothing, or the businesses that look after pharmaceuticals or the shampoos. It doesn't matter what good they have. People need to have disposable income. The only way to do that is to create your economy and stimulate your economy. And the other thing that the governments are going to have to do when they start rolling out this infrastructure is, let's not make the same mistakes we did back in 2008 and 2009, where all of a sudden we had inflation and escalations of costs because again, pipe suppliers or asphalt suppliers, whatever, started. It was a feeding frenzy. We need to start putting some regulations in place. We got to start thinking about this now in order to have an effective program roll out in 6 to 8 weeks. Thank you.
Okay, thank you so much. I'm muted. Another one, will the Energy East pipeline and discontinuation of imported oil be back on the table once we are in recovery mode? So I'll give that one to Shannon.
Thank you. Yeah, I appreciate that question. This is one of the issues that I highlighted in my statement on April 2nd, or no, actually on April 3rd. I did the op-ed on April 2nd about the approvals of private sector projects. And then among the multi-point proposition I made on April 3rd, I talked extensively about the necessity for Canada to achieve diverse market access. So on a number of fronts. One is that we have recommended that the government immediately engage with all proponents on the conditions necessary to expedite the construction of a west to east pipeline, obviously to help reach export markets in Europe, but also, and critically, to secure supply and self-sufficiency for Canadian energy. We continue to call on the government to immediately work with provinces to develop multi-use national energy corridors in multiple directions. On top of that, I've also said that they should go back and issue a call to proponents to secure the conditions to establish a standalone export pipeline to the West Coast for exports to the Asia Pacific markets. You'll know, of course, it's the Trans Mountain expansion is proceeding, but the majority of that does go into the United States refinery network. Only a marginal amount of it goes into the Asia Pacific. We have said that obviously construction of the Trans Mountain expansion is an emergency, and it is something I've been calling on for a number of months, but once again calling on the Liberals to immediately report how they are going to expedite completion and in service date of the Trans Mountain expansion. One of the aspects of that can be declaring that in the general advantage of Canada, and also with regular reporting on costing and progress to Canadians, as well as a plan to get it back into the hands of the private sector, and also to commit that the federal government will provide any and all resources necessary for any outstanding legal or political or regulatory risk to the completion of Line 3 and of KXL. So you'll know that Keystone XL has started construction immediately, but there does remain potential political risk in November. And I support actually the Alberta government's leadership on, I think, what was a much more responsible and also necessary action in supporting KXL, with some key differentiations from the decision and the purchase of the Trans Mountain expansion. David could get into some of that. He might want to, but the issue with the Energy East pipeline specifically is that I have been in regular contact with TransCanada officials, and as you all know, they believe that the political and regulatory uncertainty and the hostility of the federal government just makes it untenable for them to revive the Energy East pipeline, but we continue to say that that is necessary infrastructure. And I hope that the recent collapse of prices with the Saudi-Russia war will show Canadians finally, without a shadow of a doubt, not that this would be news to anybody here, that energy is critical not just to the Canadian economy, but frankly to our national security and to our position in the world. And so we continue to push for the conditions to be set and for the government to take a leadership role in establishing west to east pipeline infrastructure with an eye to a long-term phase out of dependency on foreign oil.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Shannon. Is there anything that you can add in regards to Minister Savage's press release yesterday, OPEC doing the curtailment of 10 million barrels of oil and how that will look for us?
Yeah, I think David may want to provide more details specific to Minister Savage's announcement, but I can tell you I was really grateful to be able to speak with her last Tuesday. We keep in touch. So she had updated me that there was the Thursday call for the OPEC plus countries and that she represented Alberta there. David might know the update on this. At this time, I know that actually the federal minister was not involved a couple of days prior. I don't know if Canada ever did end up with representation there, but my understanding is that the negotiations were to have actual producing jurisdictions, of course, of which Alberta is one. And so I know that they had announced that 10 million barrel per day cut, excluding Mexico, and then over the weekend established a $19.7 million or a million barrels per day cut with the OPEC plus countries, as well as the G20 agreeing to cut 3.7 million barrels per day. I know in conversations with Minister Savage, and David again could elaborate on this, but that the Alberta government was in a full support of reaching a global agreement on a global production cut. But it probably won't surprise you to know that I believe what is required to revive the Canadian energy sector in particular goes well beyond a global production cut, because the crisis in the energy sector was long-standing, well before the triple threat of the Saudi-Russia war, the COVID-19 with declining demand and then collapsing prices. So I still believe there is a whole suite of actions that the federal government can take that will be necessary to restore investor confidence and bring money, jobs, and businesses back to the Canadian energy sector in particular.
Thank you so much, Shannon. I've unmuted your line, Dave. Did you want to touch base on that?
If I could, thanks a lot, Shannon, and I fully support your support of that Energy East pipeline, but I hate to say it, but I wish you luck on that one. Maybe with what we've seen with OPEC, it might wake up some folks down there, but I think there's some pretty deep political ties going on between Eastern Canada and Saudi Arabia as well. We were very happy that our minister was included in those talks with OPEC. Unfortunately, the 10 million barrel cut, because of the surplus that we currently have in North America. Here in Alberta, I believe the last numbers I heard, we have 38 million barrels in storage. And it's the total lack of consumption going on in the world right now, especially in North America, that's really affecting us. So getting rid of that, until we get rid of all of the surplus and can actually get back into production levels, as we speak, we're shipping away a million barrels a day through our pipelines as it is, but receiving absolutely nothing in royalties for it. So it's a real double whammy. And as Greg also mentioned, right at the end of a 5-year slump in oil and gas prices, COVID-19 hits us, and then this stupid spat between Russia and Saudi Arabia. I never in my lifetime thought that I would ever buy gasoline for 54 cents a liter again. And I filled up in Edmonton last week on my way home, and it was 54 cents. So it's going to be a while, and I think the Premier's been very clear, and so is Minister Savage, that yes, it's good that we're seeing those cuts, and we'll try and get a bit bigger slice of the pie for North American markets. But it's going to take some time, and anybody that thinks this is going to be over in a month is dreaming, and it's unfortunate. one of the most promising things I see is both the federal and provincial announcements when it comes to some money for reinstating or fixing up orphan wells and abandoned wells. I think that's something that we can take advantage of up in our area, and it would definitely help to stimulate. Unfortunately, there are still some glitches there. One of our companies down in Elk Point that's been in the business for 40 plus years in abandonments and reclamation, and they filled out the paperwork federally and told they didn't qualify. So some of those little glitches that Shannon, you and I guess, are going to have to do what we can to help out there to make sure that, because like I said, we can stimulate the economy all we want federally and provincially, but if it doesn't result in local businesses and local workers getting the jobs, it's not going to be helpful to us at all. So that's something that I'll definitely be pushing forward as much as I can. Thanks.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dave. I'm going to go ahead and ask another. So for Shannon and Dave, any comments on our government's moving more toward isolating those who are vulnerable and not the whole population? So I'll start with you, Shannon, and then we'll go to Dave.
You know what? I might defer a lot of this commentary to Dave. I think these decisions probably should be mostly made by health experts and the respective chief medical officers in the relevant provinces. But just in general, I would say, you know, that's exactly the kind of thing that we're talking about internally now as we try to move forward on recommending that the federal government establish both a plan to continue seeing Canadians through this pandemic for however long it lasts, but also to establish a plan for long-term economic recovery. And so I've heard a lot. I can say we in the office and through Facebook and people talking to me, I hear a great deal about that measure across the constituency, and actually specifically from more and more people who are calling for a plan for economic recovery and for trying to resume as much normalcy as possible. But I don't know if Dave has any comments on that as well in terms of the provincial decisions.
Okay, Dave, I've unmuted your line. You go ahead.
Super. Yeah, thank you, Serena. Yeah, and I just want to reconfirm. You know, our chief medical officer, I think, has done a pretty bang up job. She's made some really tough decisions, and the premier as well. Nobody wants to see the economic impact that this has had. But I would just caution folks, protecting our most vulnerable. We've seen what happens when this virus gets loose in a seniors facility. Absolutely hate to see that happen up in our area. I don't think that now is the time to reduce caution. I know that the premier and the chief medical officer have been talking about as things. As we get better control on this and we get our curve to flatten out, that there may be some restrictions lifted on a few areas, but I would just say proceed with caution, and please, this is not the time to get complacent. This is not the time to go visit grandpa and grandma. Let's protect those people, and we just we're all in this together. I know it's going to be tough. And I hate to see it, especially like I said, up in our area, that it couldn't have come at a worse time for northeastern Alberta. But we've got to get through this, and the health of our seniors especially is critical right now.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Dave. I have another question for Jean. 1 second, my mouse he hides on me. Ask Jean, if we do not get that infrastructure funding from the federal and provincial governments soon, does that mean there won't be any work in our area for the summer? Oh, hang on, let me unmute you.
I'm already.
Oh.
You just muted. There we go. Really good question. We have can everybody hear me? Because I just got a message that said I was muted and unmuted.
No, you're good.
Okay. We had a lot of, we don't have a lot of work that can happen at the town level because of the funding that was pulled. Our capital budgets are basically reduced down to almost nothing. We're having to borrow $6 million to pay for a water line. The costs are going to start rolling in for the town's portion around June sometime. So there's going to be very little room in our budget as it stands today to be able to do very much of anything other than going and business as usual with the cleaning of the sidewalks and our public works functions and things of that nature. That's why it's so important with the Premier's announcement with regard to the infrastructure. We don't know what the details of the program are. We don't know anything. We've just put projects, we've thrown them against the wall and hopefully see what sticks. But that's why it's going to be so important for municipalities in with the financial struggles similar to the towns to be able to harness and leverage some funding. We're hoping, I've talked to Municipal Affairs and the Minister to see whether or not we can get some assistance with regard to paying back that loan or having to pay those costs, see whether we can get some funding from Alberta Transportation to cover that off, because more money that's in our pocket, the more we can start progressing forward with capital projects. So assuming that there will be some projects coming forward and some infrastructure funding that comes from the town of to the town of Bonnyville. One of the some of the projects we're looking at doing is continuing water lines. We're going to continue on paving some of the local roads. There'll be some concrete work that we've got proposed. We've got some sidewalks. We want to work on the trails, and that's all going to be contingent on getting funding. Some of the other things we wanted to move forward with, we have submitted to at least get some of the engineering and architecture done on the pool and splash park area there that we're talking over at the C2. Again, that's going to take major investment. Without the major investment, without seeing what it's going to look like, we don't know what that's going to be. But if there's an expectation that the town has to pay back 25% or 40%, it's probably a non-starter right from the start, because we don't have a lot of money, and the goal is going to be to stimulate and to put people to work. Again, local labor, local supply, and local equipment. I can't emphasize that enough.
Absolutely. Thank you, Jean. Next up, how do we go about convincing people to support local businesses rather than going online and supporting companies like Amazon and others? One thing I do want to say is that through the Chamber of Commerce, we always talk about supporting local and doing that on a very regular basis. We are starting a little campaign here through our Facebook page. It's going to be basically we're gonna support local by shopping local. We're going to go out to businesses ourselves. We're going to buy some gift cards. We're going to have a little contest where we can get people involved and hopefully stimulate things that way. We also want to talk to our businesses. We have a list of all local businesses online who are offering deliveries, who are open, reduced hours, anybody that's doing anything extra or additional since they can't open their doors. That's all on our website, bonnyvillechamber.com, under our events page. So please have a look at that and you'll see all that information. So that kind of helps just getting that information out there. But on a political level, who would like to touch on that question? Greg? Sure, hang on, let me get you unmuted. Go ahead, Greg.
Yeah, no, obviously out of this, we are going to have to think more local. If that's, this is one example, I guess, of a globalization failure. Really, if one good thing comes out of that, I'm hoping that we see some compassion for our fellow man and businesses. And that we do get out there and we, those that are able to support those folks who, especially some of those businesses that have been closed, right, through no fault of their own, their revenue and their employees have gone from working to zero. And so that's going to be pretty tough on those folks. And you know what, if we can get out and help them out at all, that's going to be great. I know today we just approved a tender for a local company for $750,000 to do some work on a couple of local trails. So we're looking at local companies wherever we can.
Beautiful. Thank you, Greg. And now I know Jean wanted to touch base on that. You go ahead, Jean.
Absolutely. Following up on Greg, this one here is going to land on the provincial government and federal government's shoulders. Supporting local businesses we have to do that as much as possible, but in order to be able to support, we need revenue coming in. It goes back to the old supply and demand curves. And with 800 jobs 2 weeks prior to this COVID thing, we're going to need some stimulus funding for our oil patch. We're going to need to put the welders back to work. We got to put pipelines in the ground. We can be building pipelines. There was an announcement going south of Hardisty. Well, how about going west of Edmonton and going into British Columbia and building that infrastructure? And in order to do that, we need significant infrastructure stimulus both from the federal government and the provincial government, because that's going to put money in the pockets so that we can start supporting local. But then we also need to get rid of or suspend that new West trade agreement that says that everybody in Canada is going to qualify. And at the national level, that's something I think that the Liberal government is going to have to focus on and essentially terminate that agreement, because if we have any program rolling out, if it looks like anything like 2009 and 2008, the Alberta economy, we're done here, because we're not going to be able to put people in business, and we're not going to be able to support business because we're going to have bidders coming out from every place, and that can't be allowed.
Perfect. Thank you, Jean. Next up, this one's for you, Shannon. It's a pretty easy one. We were wondering about this ourselves. Any idea when the summer jobs funding will be made available and applications will open?
Yeah, okay, thank you. That's a great question. So as you probably saw, the Prime Minister did make a statement with, as usual, very few details about it. So what we understand is that announcements will start coming out the week of May 7th. You probably know that originally there was an extension to the deadline to February 28th, and applications have been open since then. So to let you know, April 20th is the deadline for MPs to submit anyone else from their ridings who haven't yet applied and didn't apply previously. So please don't hesitate to email my office at shannon.stubbs@parle.gc.ca if there are any additional ones. But I will caution you, what we have learned literally just as of yesterday from the Canada Summer Jobs Program administrators is that in Lakeland, the applications are already more than $700,000 oversubscribed to the program. So we'll continue to be available to provide any assistance or any information that any businesses or not-for-profits.
Do you think that a lot of that has come from the closure, I guess, or no longer offering the STEP program? So now people,
yes,
more
exactly.
people are doing for the Canada Summer Jobs, and will there be anything to alleviate that discrepancy?
Yeah, that is our understanding. So I know that there was a change to the program where previously it offered, the federal program offered the 50% subsidy of the provincial minimum wage. Now it will offer 100%. So that might have been part of an adjustment maybe related to that decision. But, you know, I just would encourage any of your members or any businesses or any community organizations to get in touch with our office. And, but we have not received any change in terms of the allotments for Lakeland. And so we will certainly endeavor to let all of you know any details as we find them, but as of right now, there are no applications open.
Thank you so much. Okay, so I'm going to there's a couple of comments and then one more question. I'm going to touch base on one other question, so I won't be taking any more questions from the information. But somebody just said, just to clarify, if businesses had not applied to the program but would like to, they have to send that expression of interest to you, Shannon?
No.
Yes. Okay, thank you.
Yes.
Perfect. Thank you. Oh, sorry. Oh, perfect. So next up, we have a question from Robin with the Nouvelle. Since there's no timeline set in stone for when things will go back to normal, Should helping residents, businesses, municipalities, etc., be more of a focus right now instead of looking at what to do when everything is back to normal? Yes, there's some assistance programs in place, but there's still a large majority of people who don't qualify. Who would like to take that question? Dave, I'm going to go ahead and unmute you. You go right ahead.
Thank you very much, and thanks for the question, Robin. And yeah, normal in quotation marks. I don't know if we're ever going to get back to what we ever considered normal. I would just encourage people that right now, because we don't know, and it's something that I've tried to do for the last month or so whenever I'm talking to folks, is if you have neighbors, make sure you reach out to your neighbors. If there's some way you can support your local businesses, please do so. But if you do have, especially seniors on your block or in your neighborhood, give them a call. We've got a few out here that we keep on and try to keep in contact with on at least every couple of days to make sure they're okay, have everything they need, and aren't going into town unnecessarily. So that's the kind of that's going to be the normal for now. I just encourage people to please stay with the program. The better job we do right now, the shorter it will be. If we start to get complacent now and we get a second spike provincially or nationally, it's going to mean that we go through this for a lot longer, and there maybe even further restrictions put forward. So I would just encourage people to, this is a time to check on your neighbors, work together as a community. Community is the most important thing right now.
Thank you. There's one comment here. It says our particular problem as retailers that have closed voluntarily is that our competitors are remaining open, and they're finding a lot of essential services aren't that essential. So Shannon, can you touch on that? Essential services that are open versus some that are kind of riding that line?
So those decisions are ones made by the provincial government, and each provincial government will make the determinations around what are essential services and what what businesses are open, what kind of restrictions there are. I just would comment on the previous question though. I completely agree that the focus needs to be maintained on supporting Canadians and businesses and communities. That's why we have been so active calling for the funding to flow through and identifying gaps and issues where businesses and employees are not qualifying. It's why we've already made a series of proposals to correct some of those issues. And it's why I really do hope that people will continue to contact our office when they are, companies or individuals or organizations who are excluded, because that will help us continue to push Liberals to correct some of the gaps and the shortcomings in their program. But in terms of the restrictions on who operates and who is open, those are decisions that are made by provincial governments.
Perfect. I'm just going to put this one to Dave. Dave, in our area, we know that the need for mental health supports are definitely increasing in all areas. What's being done to meet that demand?
Okay, super. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, good. So in the 2020 budget, there was an extra $150 million put directly to mental health, but there will be an announcement coming out today, and I was on a conference call with Minister Luan this morning. I don't want to steal his thunder or the Premier, so just let me say that there is an announcement coming out that will address this at local levels, and definitely I agree with you. Pretty hard for people that have been used to going to work every day to be housebound, and especially if their business is closed and they have no way of supporting their own businesses, and it's tough on people. And like I said, we have to address this as a community as well. Provincially, we're going to do our best to make sure that the funding is there and that the supports are there for people. And I look forward to the announcement coming out this afternoon.
I have one more question. Something that I've heard specifically from some retailers is that they have laid people off, and then those people now get the Canada Emergency Response Benefit. That Canada Emergency Response Benefit is more than they were making on a regular basis, working minimum wage or whatever. Now they're looking at reopening or trying to get people in with the wage subsidy, and people aren't really wanting to return. So who would like to comment on that and how that can be regulated, or is there a regulation coming out for the amounts that people are getting? Dave, can you comment on that?
Well, yeah, I can comment. I think most of that funding is coming federally, other than the stopgap that the province put in. But again, you know, these are unintended consequences of action, right? And it's going to be a tough one to deal with. But again, people, you know, you have to depend on people's abilities to recognize how important their communities are, and that those programs aren't always going to be available, but it's always tough when you have given somebody something to take it away. And yeah, it's going to be a challenge. I understand it, and I feel sorry for those companies. And but it's a tough thing, even federally. You want to get a program out as quickly as possible, and sometimes there are unintended consequences that go along with it. So, Shannon, I don't know if you want to comment as well.
Go ahead, Shannon.
Hey, thank you. You know what, this is, that's a concern that was raised early on. I think actually even before, remember when in the first session, we passed the wage subsidy legislation, and then the Prime Minister had come out and said we were actually the ones that pushed it to be a 75%, cover 75% instead of 10%. You know that the Prime Minister came out and said that, and then oops, it turned out his legislation didn't actually enable that, which is why everybody went back into session on Saturday. But so that's, we have been hearing that a lot. It's an issue that we have raised. We're trying to advocate for some changes to ensure that people can still work also, and not, and then be able to have support as well. But you know, this is an issue that we are going to have to address, because I've heard this concern raised numerous times. There are some discrepancies and issues changing all the time, by the way, in terms of applications for AI and applications for CRB. And it is not an exaggeration for me to say that these changes are literally happening on a daily basis. So if you, as either employers or from employees or others, you know, get questions on those kinds of changes, the very best thing is to check with my office on a daily basis, because you would be, well, maybe, I guess you wouldn't be surprised, but you would be dismayed to see the adjustments and the differences that are happening literally every day in terms of the application implementation of some of these programs. But I myself am very concerned about that issue, because as I have said, I think we have to be operating on two tracks. One, to get us all through this together, but also with an eye to economic recovery. And of course, we as Conservatives, won't surprise you to believe, we actually believe that the generator of the economy and the best possible stimulus is actually the private sector and businesses and jobs.
Perfect. Thank you. So with that, I'm going to thank everyone for coming. Thank you so much, Shannon. I know we managed to get you on schedule, and I really appreciate that. And Dave and Jean and Greg, we really appreciate your feedback. To all our local businesses and communities, please remember, you know, my heart goes out to each and every one of you. I know we're all working on new normal. And it's hard working from home with a baby and doing everything else. I can only imagine other people with their financial concerns. So please, in terms of mental health resources, reach out if you need to. There are lines, there are places you can call. If you're a business and you're struggling through applications, reach out to us. We will reach out to Shannon's office. We will do everything we can to assist you as your local chamber. We've got all those resources there. Follow us online, follow us on Facebook, follow Shannon's page on Facebook, check out the Bonnyville Chamber of Commerce events under events. We've got all businesses and how they've been, hours have changed, who's offering local, and first and foremost, shop local and be safe and love each other. That's it. So I hope everyone is well, and thank you so much.